concern?
I know, Mayor, that you brought this up, say about a month and a half ago or something, but the crosswalk on Wilsonville Road around the Willamette Way West area, here we are approaching some of the longest times of darkness in the year, and several citizens have reached out to me regarding what's going on. One almost got hit a week and a half ago. I'm not sure exactly what the status is, but I would love to have the council weigh in that this is a high priority and we need to see some traction here pretty soon as to what's going on and how fast we can get that going.
We have an update for you because I talked to the mayor about this earlier. So it is a priority with staff. And, it's in development, and Mr. Weigel can probably give you an update if you want.
Yeah, so we're supposed to get bids back on December 5th, so Wednesday. Yeah.
Zach Weigel, Engineering Department.
Thank you.
You or him?
Him.
Okay.
So getting it back means what?
So we'll be getting bids, and then if they're under $100,000, then we can go ahead and award to the lowest bid.
Otherwise, we see it at council the following meeting.
Yes.
No, we'll have to redo the advertisement, and that will take a month or so.
The winter's going to be gone.
We're trying to get this done as fast as we can with the least amount of process, because we heard you say that. So
yeah,
we're trying step A, and if we were just talking about plan A and plan B, Mayor, we're trying plan A, and we're hoping that plan A works.
All right. Well, I also have heard comments as well as observed. I mean, the people out there, and it's almost dark, and you know, there's a lot more foot traffic into Graham Oaks than there used to be, is what my observation is.
Agree.
And it's concerning.
It is. And it's a priority for staff. Yep. And I would also remind people that there's that campaign out there, be safe and be seen. Don't assume that cars are going to see you. You should wear bright reflective material. This is the worst time of year for visibility, so do everything you can as a pedestrian to be seen.
Yeah.
I would also just ask one more question on this. That would be great to have that crossing as soon as possible, because I think that will add a lot of safety. But is there something else that needs to be done, especially as eastbound folks are coming into the city at a pretty high speed a lot of times? Is there something else that we should be looking at to slow the traffic down?
We do speed enforcement out there. In terms of other engineering solutions.
Well, what about temporary markings, you know, as we're getting into these, I mean, any kind of
The whole thing is being looked at, I believe, but go ahead, Zach.
So we are installing a speed feedback sign with the project for people coming into town. Okay. Yeah, so it'll tell their speed, and if they're speeding, it'll flash. So.
The reason why it took a little bit longer is because we didn't want to just look at it as a flashing beacon. We wanted to look at it holistically and figure out what the best solutions were long-term. We didn't want to just do it halfway.
Right. If we're a couple of months from actually having it in place, I'm increasingly wondering that temporary markings in the interim period, you know, as we're in the dark, wet.
What kinds of temporary markings did you have in mind?
Some caution, some.
Like a portable sign or something?
Yeah, I mean, a flasher,
we can look
you
at
know, some cone. I don't know what the options are.
Let me, I'll talk to Patty and Chris tomorrow and see if there's some interim things we can do. Okay.
It's not going to land on the ground here in 2 weeks. I mean,
no, it's not.
It's
going to take a while.
So, is there a speed zone ahead sign?
Yeah, we have a temporary one that, but we rotate that around the city, but maybe.
No, I mean.
A permanent
speed zone ahead, because you're coming in from a rural road without.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, we can take a look at that. That speed zone ahead is regulated by the change in speed, so we'll have to take a look and see what that is.
And is all of that road 45, or is some of it higher? The road to Newburgh?
I believe it's 45.
That's
right. It is, but you'd have to be a skilled driver to go 45 on that road. It's got switchbacks and.
Well, it used to be 55.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of people do 55.
Well, we can look into
it. You have to be a skilled driver if you're driving 45 and not have somebody climb up your bumper. That's what happens.
That road is dicey.
Yeah, but the concern is, you know, of course, the time of year, the weather, and recognizing that we're not under construction, you know, I would very much be appreciative of finding some way to sign it here for the next month or however long it's going to be, that we can add a little extra margin there.
Yep.
Thank you. Anybody else on agenda or councilor concerns? I have one piece of business that I'm going to need to insert under mayor's business, and that is the paperwork is prepared by staff to apply for the $3.6 million loan from the state to build Garden Acres.
We talked about that at the last council meeting.
Yeah, we talked about it. You know, question is, can we get the council to give us a formal, you know, yes, please go ahead with that, so that we have that final piece of the plan. If you recall, there's $5-point-something million in other funding, but the gap in order to be able to move the project forward, which they hope to do here this coming spring, is the 3.6 that we are proposing to borrow from the state. Will have to be paid back, but, you know, assuming we can get some private sector interest and get going on some private development, that will ease the payments considerably. In the interim, we can cover the payments even without the private development.
Yeah, we talked about the increment coming in from urban renewal, and that the coverage stuff should be addressed in 2 to 3 years at the most.
Yeah. So I didn't know if you want staff to say something to council if we're going to be looking for a
I mean, I can
motion.
certainly, if you bring it up during mayor's business, just
Okay.
give you the kind of 30,000 foot, what we're asking for. It requires it to be approved by the highest elected official, which is why we put it on the agenda last time, to make sure there were no issues or concerns. So
Yeah.
a motion and a second by council and a discussion and vote is all we need.
Okay. No change from when we talked about before. It's just process.
Process.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Anything else? If not, we'll ask Ms. Batesville to come forward and help us on town center plan, I guess.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mayor Knapp, councilors. My name is Miranda Bateshaw. I'm planning manager for the city of Wilsonville. And I think I'm selecting the right presentation. Yes, very good. Thank you for having us here tonight. As you know, the project team has been working on the Wilsonville Town Center plan for about 2 years now. We started the public input process with the community in February of 2016. 17. And so we've been through 2 years of community outreach, and through that process have developed a community-driven vision for the Wilsonville Town Center that really is talking about creating a compelling community gathering space. That town center is a place of increased activity with a main street. It's multimodal, it's walkable. People come here to live, work, visit, shop, and play, and it's a very active place. You'll see in your packet, attachment A to the staff report does include the proposed plan and map format, just to remind you of the concepts that evolved through that planning process. But what we're going to focus on tonight and where we're at in the plan is really looking at the strategies on how to implement that. There are a number of projects, a number of economic development strategies, different things that we can be talking about that we've heard from the community, both the residents and business owners and members in the community. So tonight what we're going to do is walk through those different implementation items and get input from you. Here with me tonight is Alex Dupy, principal for MIG, and I'm going to let him go ahead and take it away from here.
Great. Thank you, Miranda. Once again, thank you, councilors, for having us in tonight. It's good seeing everybody. So I'm going to talk about 2 key pieces. It's really the end products for the plan in many ways. It's the implementation strategies, which is actually how you implement that vision that we've been talking about and developing with the community the past couple of years. And so with that and the 2 pieces I'd like to talk tonight specifically are the implementation strategies that we've been working through, but also some of the development code that goes along with this. We've been working with the Planning Commission pretty extensively over the past couple months to refine and hone that language, and we continue to do that. We have a couple outstanding questions with the Planning Commission that we'll talk about tonight. But that's starting to get pretty well gelled and moving into the draft plan itself. So with the implementation strategies, there are major elements that are part of this last chapter of the plan. Infrastructure, parking, placemaking, economic development, which is mostly how you pay for the projects, but also things like transit investments. What is SMART's role within this plan to actually implement the vision from a multimodal strategy? And then finally, the regulatory actions. How does the development code and comprehensive plan fit into the implementation strategy for this document? But also, what do you do with things like the transportation system plan or the parks and open space plan, where there are recommendations in this plan that could affect that plan over time as well. So I'll step through each of these, and then we have a few questions at the end for you, primarily around the key framework projects we've been discussing that people want to see happen first. The key piece with this is, what's the city's role in the process for implementing the plan and supporting it? Partly it's adopting this plan to start that action, to have a roadmap for the next 20 years, but also what are the partnerships with the private industry and private developers and community as a part of this that are also a strong part of this plan itself too. So it's not just a city role, but also it's not a private role exclusively as well. It's a partnership between the two. I just want to show this slide. We went through with the task force a prioritization exercise where we looked at implementation projects, which are kind of big infrastructure projects, but also looked at different placemaking strategies, what potential economic development strategies were important to the task force. And the information that we have in the implementation plan is founded on the work that the task force has been doing over the past couple of years, particularly with prioritization and what happens first. And so this dot exercise we used is a way to say what's most important to you, and then with those red dots, what's not important? What are things that we shouldn't be focusing on? And so it was a way for us to help prioritize, really the limited amount of dollars that are available to do some of these projects, particularly in the near term. With infrastructure, we made some assumptions. There is a lot of infrastructure within Town Center now. We've developed street cross sections as a part of this project. So the street projects were built to those specific cross sections. And with that, we have assumed that stormwater, sewer water and infrastructure would be located within those streets. So the costs that you see in those specific projects include not just the streetscape, but the entire vertical of what the street is. So it's all the pipes, sidewalks, as well as the streetscape features. We are looking at some streets to make sure that where full build out is not necessary. Courtside Drive, for example, after we've done the infrastructure analysis, it looks like we may not have to do sewer and water work there, so it might be a restriping project, for example, which is a much different cost than full build out. And then finally, we did look at ways to break these up into sections. Some of these are very expensive, so how do you do these projects over time, particularly as development happens within Town Center? This is our map. This is essentially the key for the major infrastructure projects. They're color-coded, where yellow is more of the streetscape or intersection work, whereas the pink is more of multimodal, cycle track, other types of bicycle and pedestrian amenities, and then green are the parks projects. Many of these will happen likely with development, but some of them are key framework projects that will require partnerships with public and private persons within Town Center. So from an infrastructure standpoint, there are a lot of infrastructure projects within the plan, but there are a few key ones that really stand out and that we've gotten a lot of input on what is the most important, and it's really Park Place. And specifically the Park Place extension from Wilsonville Road, essentially up to Town Center Park. And creating that connection was seen as the linchpin really to starting Town Center to transition into a more walkable mixed-use district that starts to implement the vision that the community has developed over time. With that are come Wilsonville Road intersections. And it was interesting to have this conversation because we didn't talk about dependencies in terms of when these projects would happen with task force, But Wilsonville Road came up almost as important as the Park Place extension. And it's interesting that Wilsonville Road likely wouldn't be done until Park Place came in anyways, because we would be talking about a different intersection configuration along Wilsonville Road. So the fact that these two came up high together is good to see that those two dependencies are actually well supported, but also well related. From a planning commission standpoint, they supported the task force outcome, and we had more discussion about specific timing. But overall, these are the two most important projects that both the task force and planning commission want to move forward as soon as possible. There are other pieces with implementation, parking strategies. We've done a high-level parking analysis earlier on in this plan. We believe that parking management will become an important issue within Town Center. There's a lot of capacity within Town Center now just with the existing facilities. And so as a part of this project, it's recommending a future study as development comes in to start to manage your parking more efficiently, particularly with on-street parking. As the street grid evolves and develops over time, that's really the time when you need to start thinking about parking management. To be honest, right now, parking is doing what it's going to do, and until development starts to happen, there really isn't a reason to start to change that. Other pieces, placemaking strategies. This is something that's been very important over the past couple of years, talking with the community, both businesses and residents. People want activity in Town Center. They want, programmed activities and art. Town Center Park is already is a place for many of these activities, but it's doing some other things like food carts. Lunchtime farmers market has been very highly rated throughout the process. But also things that you're doing already, signage and wayfinding. How do you get to, through, and around Town Center? And so thinking about that through your citywide wayfinding is an important element actually of this plan too. So it's great to already have that in the process and moving forward. The key piece from a placemaking strategy moving forward, though, is really starting to hone in what your streetscape looks like. What's the brick pattern? What's that specific light or the garbage can? We're not quite at that level at this plan, but developing a consistent pattern and palette through Town Center is a great way to to really make a project coalesce around a single design vision. From an economic development strategy, there are a variety of features within this. Some of them are funding and financing, how you pay for the plan. Others are tenant and business retention programs. That's been a big concern, not just to small businesses, but also people who come to those small businesses. They want to make sure that as Town Center evolves, that those businesses are still going to have a place in Town Center. And so looking at specific programs as a part of implementation to make sure that there's both retention, but also attraction of small businesses within Town Center, so it keeps that great vibe that's there now. So it's not losing what's already successful, but really building on that. Albeit with a slightly different development pattern. And then other pieces, vertical housing development zone, which are it's actually a state program, and that's a way that you can actually get incentives for developers to build mixed-use buildings. And those are the types of things that this section is looking at. One question that we had, and this was, actually we had a lot of conversation with this with the task force, was some type of organizational framework for businesses where, for example, the Chamber of Commerce may be a part of that, but it's really a local business organization that can advocate for local businesses within Town Center specifically. The Chamber of Commerce is a much larger organization and can provide support for that, but we're thinking, and what we've seen in many other places is that a Main Street Business Association or a business association in general is a good way for people to organize and to advocate for what they want. And that could be flower baskets, it could be picking up the garbage, but it could also be some of those programming things that we found very attractive for people from a placemaking standpoint. So how do you actually get some of those things moving? And that's a good way to start doing that.
So was a disagreement that you don't really need this, or between just forming a smaller group underneath the chamber? I don't know what some disagreement between task force members means.
So from a task force, and Miranda, jump in if there's others. So some felt that the chamber, for example, could do that job very well.
Oh,
Others felt that the chamber does a great job at citywide or even region-wide issues, but town center needs more attention
subset.
and a subset, and there are different issues specifically within town center, or even any business district. We're certainly working in town center, but you see these pop up in downtown Oregon City, Tigard,
Right.
Vancouver, Washington, that are advocating for a smaller, more focused business interest.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure that's
Yeah.
what you were referring to, is that just.
Yeah, and it was really, some
Like
people thought we needed
disagreement.
it, some people thought we didn't.
Okay, thanks.
From a transit standpoint, we've been coordinating with SMART to look at, not just how town center changes over time from, from not relying specifically or exclusively on vehicles, automobiles to get around, but what's transit, or what is SMART's long-term transit plan? And it's great that they are, just wrapped up their transit plan, because what we've been able to do is talk with them directly about what's the future of transit, partly in Wilsonville, but also within town center. So are there specific locations that they might want for bus stops? What do those bus stops look like in 10 or 15 years? As the types of buses changed, going from, a driver to an autonomous vehicle, does that change how we think about, providing transit within town center? And so that's something that SMART's actually working on right now. And as a part of the implementation plan, we'll have, a much more specific transit component to the implementation chapter, which is great because, how people drive and get around is changing very rapidly. And SMART wants to be part of that process and talking about how that change happens within town center to be more, not just transit oriented, but also pedestrian and bicycle oriented as well. And then finally, regulatory actions, and we'll get into some more depth in this, but there are specific actions from the regulatory standpoint, comprehensive plan and development code amendments. There are CC&Rs, covenants, conditions, and restrictions within town center that we've been talking with the city about and how to address, but also other things, updating the parks plan, utility plans as necessary, and the transportation system plan. I'm going to focus specifically on the comp plan and the development code right now, though. So with the comprehensive plan, we are proposing a new town center development section with specific policies to implement town center plan. And the reason why we're recommending that is town center is a much different place after this plan is adopted than it is today. And so identifying it as town center and providing specific policy guidance is an important element in providing clear direction for the community, but also developers and others looking at town center in the future to make sure that that vision is implemented. And with that is also a new town center zoning district. What we found is that the current zoning doesn't quite get at what we're looking at from both a design standpoint, but also different types of land uses. And this is something we've been working through with Planning Commission pretty extensively. So it's focusing on specifically Main Street, where there might be very specific development and design regulations to provide that walkable Main Street that people have told us that they want to see. But also looking at other things that have a large impact to that. Off-street parking, open space and plaza standards. So those are the types of things that are related, but also from a district-wide standpoint, still provide those spaces for people to congregate and, and feel as a part of that development, as opposed to getting in a car and leaving, or getting in your car and coming and then not staying. A piece of this is looking at your parking requirements. There are a variety of ways that jurisdictions across the region are working with this in new or emerging mixed-use districts. Part of that is providing more flexibility, particularly for mixed-use buildings and how you count that parking, but also looking at the large amount of unused parking areas right now, and are there ways that you can actually use them for development off-site? So do you require a certain amount of parking on-site for your development and then allow extra parking off-site almost as a surplus? But what that does is that's a way to actually use some of the surplus now, and then as that area develops, then you start to consider structured parking or pieces like that. So we're not recommending as a part of the code or the plan that the city develops a parking structure per se. If we had that, that would be part of private development as a partnership. Knowing where those happen is really, it's a better way to think about it as an incentive as a developer comes in to think about it, and not build it and they will come. So a couple questions that we've had through Planning Commission. One is this question about maximum floor area. Right now, large format retail is permitted within town center, but we've heard very clearly that that format is not what's desired here. It may work better in other places like Argyle Square or other locations. What folks are looking for is a much more intimate space. So that's smaller footprints that still allow a large anchor tenant, for example, but not to the scale of 120,000 square foot Target, something like that. So we are looking at limitations on that floor area ratio. I think the question that Planning Commission is thinking about right now is, what's the right number if there is a limitation, and then should you limit it if you could do it in more than one story? For example, you see 2 or 3 story Targets, you see a couple 2-story Safeways. You're starting to see multi-floor commercial and retail spaces come online that use space more efficiently, but that is a different land use pattern than what you see in Wilsonville today. So these are a couple questions that we're looking at with the Planning Commission. But also, are there specific locations that you have within town center where you should be more strict than others? For example, if it's near the freeway, should you be more open-ended? Allow a little larger floor plate. Whereas along Main Street, do you want to be a little bit more focused on smaller scale development? Did we lose one there?
Back?
Yeah. Oh, and drive-throughs, excuse me, same one. And then the second question is drive-through facilities. This has also been a question. There are a number of drive-through facilities within town center. Should those be permitted within town center? The way our draft code is written now, that those existing uses would be allowed to continue and redevelop as drive-through facilities. But the question would be, do we allow more? Or do we restrict them outright? And so that's another question that the Planning Commission is looking at. From what we've heard from the public is that drive-throughs are really tough for pedestrians. And so if they are permitted, what's the right location for those? So aside from those 2 questions from on the code, some questions that we've been asking Planning Commission, and these are actually similar questions that we asked the task force, are from a framework project standpoint, whether it's Park Place or Courtside Drive or some of the park spaces, what's a framework project that City Council would recommend, or are there specific ones that should be highlighted as high priority projects? And the second question is, and this is what we asked early on, is what's the city's role for those projects? Is this through urban renewal? Is it a public project or a private project or a combination of those? And then finally, from an economic development strategy, an economic development and organizational strategy, are there specific organizations that the city should start to coordinate with on that? Chamber of Commerce is certainly one that's come up many times, but also smaller business organizations or other public, city departments that might be a part of that, like parks, for example. Are there specific organizations for us to consider from a partnership standpoint? So those are the questions and where we're at right now. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions. Thank you.
All right, lots of stuff. Council, questions, perspectives, observations? Councilor Starr.
So right now, I guess Bridgeport is just the easiest thing that comes to mind to think about something like this. There are a great deal of different land ownership groups within town center. So I don't remember what I don't think Bridgeport had that issue. There was some, but not anything close to the scale that we have. So what was the thought around trying to convince so many ownership groups to come behind a plan to do stuff? Because the shape of a number of buildings, some of them need help now and some of them are in pretty good shape and may not need help for a long time. So you're going to have a lot of varying motivations behind a lot of these folks. So I'm just kind of curious if there's a roadmap or what other municipalities have done to bring people together on that.
Sure. you want to start, Miranda? You want me to?
Go ahead.
Thanks. So partly, I think with how we think about implementation, this is a long-term plan. When you look at Bridgeport or other master plan developments, Gresham Civic Station is another example. That is one or a very small number of landowners, not more than 2 or 3. And certainly when you see, development of that scale happen very quickly, that is usually a single developer. Town Center is a very interesting location that there actually are very few developers for the size of the project area that we're looking for. Like it's about 100 acres, and there's again just a handful of landowners. ROIC, Fry's, those are major landowners within Town Center. Kaiser is another one as well. So how we would imagine this developing over time is that certainly smaller landowners may improve their buildings, and actually, facade retrofits, facade improvements are a great place to start just changing the vibe of Town Center. But, specific areas like Kaiser or Fry's, for example, have unused space, parking lots, for example. And so we could potentially see those areas developing first with existing uses staying. And then over time, those uses transition into, more the full vision of the area. So it's incremental, which is one reason why we've broken up some of the implementation strategies into being pieces. Park Place is a good example of that. But there is certainly, ROIC, if they decided to redevelop their site, owns the entire, southeast quadrant of Town Center and could make change very quickly if they wanted to. So nothing in the plan requires developers or landowners to do any of this. What it does is it sets the framework for when this does happen. These are generally where the roads go. This is the building footprints or the building frontages when they do come in. So that's the type of framework that it gives. It's less about specific timing. That's more about when the projects would start to happen, and that's when you'd start to see change.
Other questions, comments? Councilor Akeball.
I wondered about conversations with Clackamas Community College, since that falls in here, and if we're looking at that as a partner, or what directions we maybe see those conversations going.
Yes, Clackamas Community College has been a partner, as you know, on the project task force. They've also been engaged from the standpoint as a property owner. So we have multiple stakeholder groups that we've engaged throughout the process. As you all know, we've been out in the community a lot. Throughout each major milestone, we've also pulled together meetings with major landowners or even smaller landowners, those that are at the table and wanting to participate. And so we've met with them numerous times throughout this process, and we've been collecting their ideas in terms of long-term growth for the university and kind of how we can partner on that and the things that they're looking for in order to sort of cultivate the environment that they're looking at for the university there.
Councilor Stevens?
Thanks. So also there's this neighborhood mixed-use piece directly across from Memorial Park, which is now police station, Public Works, until they get their new building. But that's slated for redevelopment. The city owns most of that area. I'm not sure about the senior housing that's in that. I'm not sure how far this goes, but is that a place that could be a jump start since we have that piece already, or at least a portion of it? This community center, are we thinking of relocating the community center so it's more central? Has that conversation happened at all during the task force?
There has not been a conversation about necessarily relocating that community center and what purposes it serves currently.
Mm-hmm.
There has been conversation about more space for community. Yes. There's a feeling generally that what's provided at the community center is great, but that we have a greater need than is currently being met. Mm-hmm. So there has been discussion about that and integrating civic uses, particularly in locations around new open space would be a primary location for that we've heard.
For a building in open space?
If there were, so if additional community centers or an additional space that offered more community center space, whether it's the existing one relocating and growing or whether it's a secondary location, there's desire to have that connected with either nearby Town Center Park or near one of the other open spaces so that there's some type of potential indoor-outdoor connection and ability to play off of that. So we've heard support for increased space, not necessarily moving existing space, but as city-owned property is always an opportunity to think about how the plan gets implemented, particularly if there are other components of relocation or growth identified. But we haven't necessarily identified that specifically through this plan so far, but it's obviously something that the council could talk about.
So one more thing. So I'm assuming the buildings, that colored area includes the, I forget what the name of that residential area is, where the senior housing, where we, a lot of the Creekside, that's it, Creekside. So that's some of the Creekside apartment complexes, right? Mm-hmm. Those buildings, so, which I think is more affordable housing.
Correct.
There was a lot of people. So if that's going to be redeveloped so that maybe that gets changed in some way, I'm not quite sure how that'll all pan out. Is there a place for affordable housing within the other areas of the whole project? Has that conversation
Of the whole
happened?
town center?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so two things. I do want to note that part of the reason why that parcel ended up with that neighborhood mixed-use designation is because of those housing units and the desire to make sure whatever goes at that intersection kind of steps back and has a good transition with those existing, with the existing Creekside apartments. So I wanted to sort of highlight the reason for that underlying land use on that parcel.
Okay.
And then the second component is that, yes, there is the ability to provide housing in the town center to a greater extent than what we currently have it zoned for in this proposed development code. At this point, there would be a range of potential housing that could be provided. We don't determine necessarily what goes in as affordable or not. There is in the code one provision that we're still working on the specifics of with Planning Commission, but that does highlight the potential for an incentive around affordable housing. If a certain percentage of affordable housing units are provided, that there's potentially some type of density bonus or height bonus that they might be able to get. And we're still working on the details with that at the Planning Commission. As you know, the Equitable Housing Strategic Plan is about to kick off. And so really through that process is when we'll look more specifically at affordable housing citywide and appropriate strategies for Frog Pond and for Town Center.
Okay.
We're 5 minutes long on this
Thank you.
subject, so
Okay.
is there anything that you need from council in terms of direction, concurrence, or thumbs up?
Primarily, it would just be feedback on the information that's put in front of you. So I would essentially welcome any comments to the development code, the new provisions that we're proposing that are in your packet,
And
to
they can
send those to me.
Send those to you directly, email or
Yes.
phone call or whatever?
Yes,
Okay.
and then any of the, on page 9 and 10, and maybe even goes to 11 or 12, there's a chart of implementation strategies, the matrix that we're working with that will get written up in the plan. So if you have feedback on those strategies, we welcome that feedback as well,
Okay.
which goes along with these questions.
Perfect.
So some of us are going to have more detailed discussion we'd like to have, like me, so I'll try to do that offline. It's kind of a generalized comment is, I think there's a lot of exciting concepts in this. I have concerns about how you kick it off and make it start happening, and I suspect that that involves work on Park Place and that it would require some kind of a partnership with some private sector development agreeing that the city goes ahead and does certain streets, work, and then that they are committed to building some kind of something along that street. I can't quite see how it would go forward without both of those components. And I can't see quite how a less visible or less major sort of a undertaking would create the kind of a buzz that would really be a investment attractor. I mean, so I think you got to kind of get to the tipping point, and so I'm thinking about all those pieces and how that works, but it seems to me like it's probably a partnership development agreement of some kind that would have to involve a couple of parties in order to make that move. So
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And just to briefly, many of these projects we assume would be agreements amongst not the city and private developers, but also the way the plan is laid out is that there could be incremental actions that don't require city funding. Like if a parking lot were to redevelop, that's something that would still be a vision implementing the vision of the plan, but is hopefully a quicker win than what it would take
Well,
to build.
that would be interesting when you get somebody to the table willing to put that investment down without seeing anybody else doing anything. That's the challenge, I think.
The first is always the hardest, for sure.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Ms. Rodacker and Mr. Weigel, water SDCs. We got you down for 20 minutes, but don't use more than you need to.
And we also have this evening with us Doug Gabbard from FCS. So over the last couple of times that we've come to the meetings, we were always at the end and never had any time to speak. So hopefully we'll have a few minutes here for the discussion that council should be having on this particular issue. As we recall, the driving force of our SDC rates are the SDC eligible projects. Excuse me. So part of the process was gathering all the different projects from the various plans and budgets, and we came up with a total of 167 projects, of which $66.6 million were eligible for the SDC components. So here is the actual calculation of the SDC. You can see where here's the $66,000 from the project list and how it's being divided over the 7,015 MCEs, which I've been told is the meter capacity equivalent, and bringing in the reimbursement fee, the improvement fee, and our compliance fee brings the rate up to $9,600.
So Zach Weigel, Capital Projects Engineering Manager, and there were some questions about where these projects came from, and it really started with the completion of the water treatment master plan a couple years ago. And I threw in this slide to show the kind of the top projects that came out of that plan and both in our water distribution master plan. And you can see that a significant portion of that eligible SDC rate is the 20 million gallon water treatment expansion that needs to happen in 2020. And then again, the 30 million gallon expansion needs to happen in 2032. So just those two projects, you're looking at about $33 million. Also, the surge tank is underway. That water treatment plant operations and repair, that's kind of an annual budget item, but there's some SDC improvement eligibility in that project because as we replace things at the treatment plant, we replace them with appurtenances that can increase the capacity of the plant. So that increased, or that portion of the fee is SDC eligible.
So have we been, how do I say this? We got in a situation where we're behind now, apparently, where we thought we were, and all of a sudden we have major costs to try to cover. One of them is a $32 million expansion in 2032, sorry. Showing my age. Is it our normal methodology to be rolling in something that far ahead and is that at full cost, today's dollars, full cost $2032? I mean, how are we looking? I mean, that's a half of the money is for a project in 2032.
Tied to our 20-year plan, isn't it?
Right, so yeah, we're looking at the SDCs are looked at 20 years in advance.
And all the way to our urban growth boundary.
Right, yeah, exactly. And that's where that, the future distribution oversizing looks at what pipelines are going to be needed to be oversized to serve development over the next 20 years, and that's where that $9.7 million comes from.
Of the projects that are currently slated in the budget on the 5-year forecast that we have established, $23 million of the projects are slated for the next 5 years. So we have quite a bit coming up.
So what kind of buy-in are those developments that occur in the next 20 years going to pay toward the system that they are going to need to have in place in order to build? I mean,
They're buying into the same level that every previous homeowner did. So the list of projects are based on our 20-year plan. The 20-year plan changes every 3 to 5 years, right? It's based on need, and we look out, and as we expand our urban growth boundary, the project lists change.
so does that 25,600 number, is that the total cost of that project, or is that what's left after people buy in between now and 2032?
I believe that's, go ahead,
That is only the
SDC
SDC
eligible.
eligible that the city is responsible
That
for.
doesn't answer my question, though.
Okay, so in future dollars, the SDC eligible portion of that project will be $25,600,000. There are other costs that are not SDC eligible that will also need to happen at that time.
But
And then
what,
there's also a
what's the
portion-
spread between the buy-in from future users, including industrial user, and how does that money get used, and how does the aggregate of those buy-ins compare to 25 million?
I'm probably not understanding the question. So whatever's not SDC eligible will be covered through rates. So existing users will not be paying this unless they expand their facility that requires an SDC.
But new users for the next 14, 15
So
years.
somebody comes in and puts a whole new building down,
Yeah.
they will pay the full freight for that. For the 25.6, I mean, they'll pay the new SDC
And the
rate.
aggregate of those new buildings over that many years amounts to how many dollars? And how does that aggregate total of dollars compare to the cost of the expansion?
Do you have an answer for that? 'Cause I'm not tracking.
So I think I can help if I understand you right. So you have a total project list of about $111 million in the 20-year planning period, okay? Of that $111 million, and that's what's on the screen now, the city cost is $111 million. When we decide how much of that is going to benefit future users, that $111 million winnows down to about $66.6 million. And it's the 66.6 that gets divided out into the SDC that gets charged. So even if you charge the full SDC and the exact right amount of growth shows up, you'll collect that $66.6 million and you'll be able to spend it on projects. The rest of it, to get you to the 111 million, you have to get someplace else, and that's, as Mr.
rates.
Cosgrove
Rates.
says, from rates.
So you're saying if we didn't grow at all, we would have 45 million that the current citizens would have to put in to just stay where
No,
we needed to?
no.
If we didn't grow
This
at all,
is to
we'd have
serve
111.
future growth.
I understand, that's the 66 million.
Oh,
So-
yes, oh, yes,
So the
absolutely.
45 million is
Yes.
left.
That's right.
We have to upgrade that much, we have to upgrade our systems over the next
20 years.
20 years, $45 million, just to stay where we are right now.
Yes, but I mean, you've interpreted the math correctly. That's not outlandish, given the needs of asset replacement. So that's,
Lines get old, need to
That's
be
right.
replaced, equipment,
Seismic upgrades.
seismic is a whole
Okay.
host of things. I will say though, for the water plant, we did get a lot of additional accoutrements from our
Yes.
relationship with TVWD in terms of seismic upgrades that will save us a lot of money.
Okay.
Related to the intake, not the plant.
And so the debate we've not had is spending that money from the Big Pipe project, right?
We have not had that debate. Well, we've initially had a discussion about what you could spend that money on. You have taken no position as a council.
Right.
Right. So could you take some of that money to subsidize future growth? Yes. I would not recommend that as a good policy decision. Could you use some of that money to subsidize future rate reductions or stabilization? That would seem to make more sense because that's benefiting the people who have been here and been paying rates.
I think we need a bigger discussion because I don't immediately intuit would not recommend it. If growth in capacity is where it needs to be, then taking some of that money from that huge one-time project to do one-time growth and capacity. It doesn't intuitively, to me, to seem to be
You could, but
a wrong thing.
But I think what you're looking at is you're benefiting the wrong parties.
Right. You're benefiting the people yet to come instead of the people that paid for it right now. And that's what you want the people that paid for it right now to benefit. I could see if you used it for the 45 million because they're already here.
That would be one potential use.
All right. So the question then becomes, policy-wise, is that a discussion we want to have before we agree to a certain SDC level?
I don't think so. I mean, you can, yes, of course you can do that. But I think it gets back to the question of who you're trying to benefit. You could make an argument.
That's the discussion.
Well, and I think what I heard is that maybe that's not the approach that we want to take. But if you do, then this would be a good time to take a pause because we're talking about increasing our rates. If you want to throw $27 million as a subsidy to future developers, you can certainly do that. And now would be a good time to give that direction to staff and our consultants so we could come back with a different number on SDCs. If you want to wait and talk about rates down the road, that's not a discussion that needs to happen anytime in the near future because that's a different conversation and you can have impact on rates at any point in the future. Keep in mind that we don't receive the balloon payment on that till 2026.
But couldn't you sell the rights to that payment for a
Right.
short amount of cash? Yeah, and then do something, you could.
You could.
We
I
could
think
get
what
a-
you want to
we
do
could
is
get
you want to do an analysis of how much that is going to really impact rates over time. And then there's some opportunity costs. If you spend that money on that, then there's other things that you might want to spend that money on too. So you wouldn't want to have that conversation in a vacuum. I don't think tonight's the night for that. I think that the bigger issue in question is, do you want to subsidize growth? And if you do, now's the time to give that direction to us and we can go back and sharpen our pencils.
The other piece that I don't remember specifically, but we've talked about in the past is trying to maintain some sense of where we are competitively within the region.
I do believe we got a sneak preview on a slide that's coming up.
I'll let you do that.
So we, FCS did put this SDC compilation together for us. I think it's, unfortunately, I don't know the story behind each of these fees because obviously, every city is in a little different place than the city of Wilsonville is. One thing that I found was kind of interesting is that you can never find Happy Valley on any of these comparison tables, and that's because they don't collect all of the SDCs themselves. The water SDC, for example, is collected through Sunwise Water Authority.
They don't have their own parks district either, so they don't collect SDCs for parks.
I think they
do now.
Well, they do
just-
now, but
yeah.
Yeah, and they do streets and some other things, but I just thought that was kind of interesting. And the Sunrise Water Authority is now at $9,883 for the water SDC. And they also have a cash discount, so if the contractor does not want to pay with his credit card, they'd actually give them a 2.7% discount to pay cash, thereby eliminating the credit card fees, which I thought was just kind of interesting. But so in total, their fees are about $35,000. So they'll be.
Happy Valley.
So just my own refrain that I always give on comparisons. What are you comparing to? Is there another city in that chart that is comparable to Wilsonville in terms of topography, in terms of our geographic boundaries, age of our equipment, future growth potential? If you look at Milwaukee, they're fairly well landlocked, so they're probably not looking at a lot of growth in the future. So take the comparisons for what they are. I understand from a economic development competitiveness standpoint, you want to look at it, but it should be a factor that, you put in context.
Yeah, Tualatin would be the most glaring to me right now, just because that we know business tends to wander between here and Tualatin, doesn't really care which side of the...
But I don't know enough about their methodology, where they're at with future expansion or any of that stuff. So if you want to compare us to Tualatin, I want to say compared to what?
Right. And the other thing is, we don't know if any of these cities, I would imagine, are having the same conversation within the next 2-3 months.
Right.
And they're going to know that they have to do this.
If we really wanted to know that, we could probably find that out. Yeah.
We could,
Yeah.
if it's
I don't know if it really matters.
And Sherwood buys some of their water from us, but they're not even up here. And they're
No,
more,
Sherwood.
they're comparable. Is Sherwood up
Sherwood?
there? Sherwood's not there.
We don't know. Okay.
Was it?
We don't know.
Was it on the
We
list?
don't.
I can
It
tell
wasn't
you,
on the
I can
list.
tell you that they do assess SDCs, but I don't know at what level.
Yes, the answer is yes. Okay.
One of the interesting things is how large the Parks SDC is in several of those cities by comparison to us. And here we're sitting with a Parks Master Plan that we just would love to build and haven't even figured out how to start.
Well, that SDC rate study is going to be beginning soon.
Could you help me understand the Portland number? I don't understand
Yeah,
why
why are they
that is so low
2,800?
compared to us. Don't they have a massive amount of infrastructure coming at them that they have to?
I bet you Patty could answer that.
I'm going to speculate.
But you need to be on a microphone, so.
Patty Nelson. So I'm just going to speculate because our water from Portland doesn't have full treatment. So I'm going to guess that the SDCs don't account for all the treatment facilities that they're currently planning and trying to build. So I don't know what the status is in terms of updates, but that would be the glaring thing that would stand out to me.
Their rate profile is on an upward trajectory.
Right.
So I don't think it includes future rate increases yet in terms of SDCs or actual rates. So the SDCs, I don't know that they're current.
Well, and can I say one more thing? The other thing that stands out to me is, I forgot, SDCs are really about growth, right? So Wilsonville and Sherwood.
Right.
We're the growing areas, so that makes sense that our SDCs would be higher.
And
But
Portland
Portland's
is
growing like crazy in population.
More so infill?
infill.
Yes.
They do all theirs infill. Yeah,
Okay.
but there'd still be some SDCs associated with that. So I don't know enough about their SDC structures, Counselor Starr, to answer that intelligently.
Yeah.
One general caveat that applies to these comparisons and in addition to the ones that Mr. Cosgrove gave earlier is we don't know if any of these comparable cities implemented their SDCs at the full defensible rate. They're having policy discussions just like you guys are and saying, no, we need to be competitive and so we're only going to implement a certain percentage, and those conversations happen all the time.
And I will tell you that Westland has historically taken the position that they will not subsidize growth in any way, shape, or form or manner. And they've had litigation, I believe, with the home builders on a couple different occasions in the past about their projects.
Well,
So,
that chart would prove that true.
yeah.
And you have other communities that feel like they need to have growth and they feel like it comes back into their community in terms of residents that spend their money in the community and participate, and they actually do subsidize SDCs, you know, in order to look at the longer term picture.
It is an option you have. You can also look at things like phase-in. We've phased in rates before as well, so that's an option that you could take as a council as well. But again, it's an opportunity cost. If you phase in, you're not capturing full rate. So somebody's paying for that. And it's a zero-sum game. It's either you're paying, your developers are paying, or your existing rate base is paying.
Yeah, or you load your 20 years somewhere later on instead of at the front end, you know.
Well, but it's still captured in the SDC rate because we're planning out 20 years in our CIP program.
Yeah, but if you have a phased-in rate on the short time frame, then you have to load it on the long-term time frames.
Well, that could be true for rates, like rates that capture for O&M and debt service, but for SDCs, it's just a different profile.
Well, I still have to say I struggle with a water rate of $6,000 that's now going to be $9.5 grand in one shot.
So those are.
I would too, but just to make sure I'm understanding this chart and the way it works, cities that are pretty much restricted in growth are going to be on the lower end always, and cities that are growing per square mile or whatever are always going to come up a lot higher. Wouldn't that be the case?
Generally true, but I would say that there's so many caveats with SDCs, it's just hard. It depends on what type of treatment system you have. Say for your water treatment plant, could be more expensive. We have a very state-of-the-art treatment plant. I'm not sure what every other one of these other cities.
Right, well, they, I mean, obviously aren't, because, I'm not saying this to pat Wilsonville in the back, but ours is the best, so, I mean, we would be higher on that.
Right.
But as I just look at growth as a town, if we still have more geography to gobble up, we're going to have to consider our normal on the right half of the scale a lot more than a Portland or a Milwaukee or I don't know about Gresham, but I mean, because they're more dense and they're not going to grow as.
I would
you
leave
know.
it to the rate expert, but I would say to this, in terms of high-growth cities versus cities like Milwaukee that are pretty much boxed in, your SDCs are going to be higher just because you have more growth. And
Right.
that means your CIP for growth is going to be more robust. So generally speaking, I would say that's true.
The hard part is understanding, betting on the come as to what the new ratepayers will pay in taxes and things like that to help subsidize maybe the other parts of the entire column, not just water, but the whole thing. So, I mean, we have a good track record as a city for doing that.
So how many of Wilsonville's other existing SDCs are shortly to be reanalyzed?
Every time we update a CIP list, we look at SDCs in terms of growth. So we just updated our Parks and Rec master plan, so I'm sure that that will be a subject of future rate discussions.
Soon?
Well, sooner than later. I can't give you a specific time frame, but yes, it will drive that rate profile up for sure.
Streets?
Transportation,
We're
we're,
fairly.
I think we're pretty current on
that one.
streets.
The sewer, we've postponed until we complete the sewer wastewater treatment plant. Master
So I would say parks next and then sewer after that. You're in a constant review of the master plans every 3 to 5 years.
Are we doing something special? Sorry, I'm assuming, what's surface water? Is that?
Stormwater.
Stormwater.
Are we doing something special here compared to everybody else? Does our water go on special pipes or anything?
What's
that
more
makes it a lot more
surface,
expensive?
it's more surface now than pipes. Don't we do more?
The bioswale.
Yeah, the bioswales, which are less expensive.
Again, I'd
It
have.
makes you wonder if there's a different strategy that we need to employ to lower that if we're going to take more in water. or
We've been
something
more
else.
aggressive on low-impact development stuff, but I don't know. And we have a lot more river frontage, so we have a lot more cost, and you know that better than anybody because of those projects that we had to deal with when I
That's true,
first
the
got
Hope
here. So,
Falls.
again, I don't know. I'd have to look and see what other cities are planning compared to what we have in terms of their processes.
I mean, we have the same standards as a lot of cities. I
It's
mean,
kind of-
We share the same standards as
That's
like
pretty much
Oregon
driven by
City.
Metro, right? In terms of
Well, it's driven by a permit.
standards, yeah. We're in the same watersheds.
Question.
Yes,
Sorry.
Councilor Akeball.
So, these rates that we're looking at here, or the kind of the planning or proposal for rates, is based on the growth that we think we will see. And if we don't see that growth, then we won't have the money, right?
And you
So-
won't need it.
If we don't,
And we
if
wouldn't
we
need
don't
it.
grow, we don't
Okay.
collect the rates.
And we wouldn't
exactly.
need it. So there's, if you set it too high, it's not like a case of set it too high and then the growth gets scared and then suddenly you're left without the money to fund things that have to happen. It's not a risk of that.
The most important mathematical relationship in this effort is to make sure that the project costs in the numerator serve the same amount of growth that is in the denominator. And when you do that, when you get that right, it doesn't matter how wrong your growth
happens.
estimate was.
Okay, that makes sense, thank you.
Which basically means growth pays for itself, which is one of the philosophies we've talked about over and over.
You get a life cycle.
Yeah, right.
It's not-
I mean,
it's not fully,
it's
but-
always changing, you're right.
We try to get it as close as we can so
Right.
that we're not having our existing ratepayers subsidize growth.
Subsidize growth,
Because they all bought in with the same philosophy.
Right. That's what that's what I said.
So we're burning up all the time. You got more stuff to show us?
No, the last was just how it changes on the various meter sizes. We will be bringing this back in February for the final.
So if you have some ideas about how you'd like to approach this in terms of either phase-in or other discussion items, we have plenty of time to have that discussion.
Dan?
Between now and then, if you want
So
a
you
calendar.
need
if
to
you want
know sooner than.
Yeah, I mean, yes, please do let us know before then, because once we bring it to you, we're going to be asking for action.
I personally would like to see us step in. A 50% increase in water rates, you know, is a bunch to do all at once. I think that,
Not rate,
These aren't rates.
yeah, I know,
SDCs.
it's SDCs.
This is something that would be tied to building permits, so serving future growth. So we would obviously send out notification well in advance to let builders and developers know. So if they were hoping to avoid those rates, they could make a decision to submit earlier, so that always happens as well.
So with how much notice?
Well, we can give as much notice as you want if we're talking about
Well,
February.
what would your normal?
We've already sent out a 90-day notice.
To the home builders.
Yes, to the home builders, and then
A 60-day notice goes
this
out
week. Yeah.
And we could do notification and other means as well. It's not all or nothing.
How's anybody else feel?
I have one other question. So we talked about a year ago about a new public works building. We pay these rates too, if we build a new building, right?
But
Do we?
that's one of the things that we cannot charge for. We
That
can't
can never go in the
charge
SDCs.
developers for administrative buildings.
Oh, okay. So we would be building that building.
But we can't charge ourselves for.
Ourselves for that,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
Okay.
We
I'm
cover.
just curious.
We would pay through that through rates
Or through rates.
proportionally.
Okay. Because it's out, it belongs to the city.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
whatever functions they're serving out of that building would pay a proportional share.
We're not allowed to do that. Okay.
Counselor Starr?
I was just going to say, if you go back to that bar chart, that last one, we just have to watch to not get too far ahead of ourselves, I think is what your concern is. I mean, if we're out there trying to do some things with Coffee Creek and Basalt Creek, we can't be waving a flag that says, come to the most expensive place to, and, you know, put your business in. So we are going to have to be fairly strategic about finding that middle ground to.
Well, I think we already are, because there's no big industrial or employment developments looking at Westland or Tigard particularly.
Well,
There's no space there,
I
you
think the
know.
other-
Well, that's true, but at some point, people might look at us and go, that's just too high of a cost to even come.
It might happen, but can I just say in defense of Wilsonville, that has not been the case historically.
Over.
This city is known for being ready for growth when growth is ready to come, and it's because we do maybe
Because you
charge a
plan
little bit
for it.
more and we have a little higher standards in terms of development review, but people want to buy in here for a reason, and they have continued to do so. So, yeah, I think you should be mindful of it, but I think you should also keep it in context.
Right.
Well, I think by the time we do our Parks SDC, we're going to be over 40 grand. You know, it's not going to be very long.
Yeah, it's something that we need to be cognizant of, for sure. We are over on this.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's all right.
Good
Good
conversation.
discussion.
Thank you. And if you have any questions or comments, please just contact Zach or Paul.
All right, absent further comment, staff will proceed on the basis that you have.
We will, but
Presented, yeah.
we'll consider some alternatives, and we'll bring those to you in February in terms of what we've heard tonight. If you want some alternatives in terms of implementation, we'll give you some ideas and concepts with a recommendation as well. Okay?
Thank you. All right, now we're going to have to move along quickly. Recycling surcharge review.
Ms. Hinman and Mr. Ottenod.
Good evening, Mayor Knapp, councilors. Amanda Guile Hinman, Assistant City Attorney, and I'm also here with Mark Odnun. So we're here today, hopefully it'll be a brief conversation to talk about the recycling surcharge that the council adopted as part of the overhaul of the solid waste franchise agreement. So in the solid waste franchise agreement, it stipulated that since this is technically a temporary charge, that this would be reviewed by council in 6 months. So that's why we're here, and then it'll be on the council agenda for approval on the 17th. So we're and we've got Republic Services in the audience as well. So generally, we have met with Republic Services and talked about the recycling rates. As council is likely aware, the recycling markets are still pretty volatile, and there's still a lot to figure out. And so as such, we are proposing to keep the recycling surcharge as is with one minor change, and it's more of a clarification that wasn't made before, and that is if a commercial user, customer gets their recycling collected more than once a week, that they are charged based on the size of their container times the amount of times that they get their recycling collected per week. And that's just to make it what it probably should have been, and it's more equitable for the people, the users that have the larger containers but get less service per week. So we're also proposing as part of the resolution that rather than doing another 6-month review, we'll do a review in a year. And we think that'll give us sufficient data to really look at the numbers and figure out if the recycling surcharge is the amount it needs to be, if it needs to go away or be updated.
Questions? Councilor Akeball.
Do you happen to know what percent is in doing the multiple times a week? Like, is this just really affecting a small, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Is this affecting a small?
Getting a head nod from Republic Services.
Okay, I'm getting a nod. Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, well, no, I always look at body language. So
Okay.
I'll say yes.
It's a small, okay.
Yeah.
And it was just something that we didn't think about, or it didn't come up in our previous discussion on this.
Right, their billing person actually contacted me after we passed and asked that question, and I said, well, the language doesn't say it's based on multiple times, it just says based on container size. So they've been billing just based on container size. So it's going to be a minor adjustment.
Okay.
So when we started on this, it was my understanding, I don't know if we explicitly stated this, that paper is the largest volume of recycling material, and that the biggest problem was with paper. I don't know if anybody's keeping track of, well, what about the plastics market? What about the glass market, as well as the paper market? Do you have any comment or?
Well, my general understanding, and I've had some discussions with somebody from Republic Services corporate office, and basically the markets across the board, even if they're getting some cost recovery, it's not what was projected to get them back to being at cost. So across the board on all markets. And in particular, the issue with plastics is, one, there's a lot of plastics that have a little recycling symbol that actually can't be recycled. And also, like, what's really interesting is water bottles the material has become so much thinner that the amount of water bottles it takes to make new water bottles, you have to have actually a lot more water bottles. So there's all sorts of issues with plastics in particular, from my understanding, that are also a big problem. So it's a moving target for sure.
Okay. Council good with proposal to extend a year, or are we? I'm seeing head nods.
Okay.
Right.
We will have it on the agenda for the 17th.
All right.
And I think I got you guys almost caught up on time.
You did. So you yield back your remainder of your time?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Street maintenance program. Good evening.
Great. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, so I'll get the PowerPoint up for you today. All right. I'm clicking. Okay. So I'm here to give you an update on our street maintenance program. So where we are today, we are completing the 2018 priority projects, which are Wilsonville Road and Boones Ferry Road. We are on track to get the street maintenance work done in late spring, and our consultant team has finished surveying, pavement corings, and preliminary ADA designs. We are working with them to proceed to 60% design, and also to develop preliminary planning estimates. Once we have a solid idea of project cost, we can begin planning work on Day Road. This will most likely entail reconstructing sections of Day Road in phases. Okay. So we are currently in the process of developing the overall street maintenance program. We're looking at upgrading our software to help us make better decisions, and we're looking for ways to improve. Better data management and utilizing software will help us program projects cost effectively. We have over 75 centerline miles of city-owned streets, and we evaluate our streets by inspecting them and giving them a PCI, or a pavement condition index. And street segments are ranked from a PCI of 100 down to 0, with 100 representing like a new street segment with no signs of failure or deterioration. We are also evaluating existing conditions, and most of the city-owned streets were inspected and assigned a PCI in 2016, and we are cleaning up that data. Over the last few weeks, we inspected almost 80 street segments, which is really exciting, and it's very important because that means all of the city's streets now have a PCI. This is important because we use the PCI to determine our overall health of our streets. The graphic up on this slide shows the PCI is grouped in pavement condition categories. So the green category is excellent condition, the purple category is good condition, the orange category shows fair condition, and red is poor. So as you can see, overall, our streets are in pretty good condition. And based on the data we have, mostly from 2016, again, our average PCI for the city is 86. And our general goal is to keep them above a 65. So we're in pretty good shape. Okay, so the more accurate the information is that we put into our asset management system, Cartograph, the more accurate information and predictions we can get back from it. This will help us determine where we spend our funds most effectively. So as far as collecting data goes, on average, we've been inspecting our streets every 3 to 4 years, and we have the ability to perform roadway inspections in-house, which is great. And we're looking at starting a yearly inspection cycle for arterials and collectors, and every 3 years for local streets, which turns out to be about a third of our local streets every year. So facilities that get more wear typically break down faster, such as collectors and arterials, which is why we'd be inspecting those yearly. And on the graphic here from the TSP, the arterials and the collectors are shown in red, purple, and the thin green lines. I know it's kind of small and hard to see, but it is also available in our TSP. So we've been exploring ways to further utilize Cartograph, our asset management system, to help us develop data-driven pavement management programs. With frequent and consistent data entry, the program can help us better determine asset deterioration and assign or recommend the treatments at the right time. So where we want to be. Overall, our streets are in pretty good health. And again, that's using mostly data from 2016. But we are performing inspections now to kind of recalibrate our information and determine where we need to focus our efforts first. Where we want to be, we want a 5-year pavement management program that helps us apply the right treatment at the right time. This program will recommend condition-based improvements, and that will involve the yearly inspection program, as I mentioned, an updated asset management system, and this, what we're looking at right now is an add-on to Cartograph that we are looking at, and it has the ability to track asset deterioration over time and recommend treatments and in a priority based on the treatment that will help us keep our PCI above 65. And we are also leveraging staff skills. We have some amazing folks here in engineering and public works and GIS. And then most importantly, applying the most cost-effective maintenance or rehabilitation approach at the right time. So next steps, as I mentioned, we're inspecting arterials and collectors. Once we have anticipated 2018 project costs, we will determine how much of Day Road can be temporarily repaired. And we're updating the software with something like the add-on to Cartograph, which is called Scenario Builder. And we're learning more next week about that to make sure it's the right fit for Wilsonville. Our goal is to create a program where we're using data and software to perform preventative maintenance on certain roads now, so they don't require full reconstruction later. We're developing the program that meets our needs more efficiently. And then we're going to review the priorities that we take from the data that we've gathered and review with our new pavement team and the inspection results that we have received and determine the highest priorities. Anyone have any questions?
And this is Dominique Huffman in our engineering
sorry.
department.
Yes.
That's all right.
I'll
Ms.
get it right
Huffman,
next
right?
time.
It's all right.
Yeah. Counselor Starr.
So my question would be, with all the information that we have, are we looking at who is putting in the roads or what is being put in the roads that last the longest, so we know? Because when I see up there, I can see different segments of time when this road was put in, or that road was put in, or that neighborhood, but some of them may not be lasting as long as other ones. So are we looking at that historical data to say, these are the builders, road builders that are doing the best job of putting them in, or this is the material that lasts the longest, or is that part? I never heard that part of the discussion, so.
Sure, that's great. And tracking historical data like that is very important to managing the program. We currently don't utilize our software in such a way, but we have the ability to, and we can input the data we've gotten over the last however many years for the reports that have been generated in the past to help us with that. A lot of it is also based on industry experts' knowledge and advice as we start programming out what our priorities are for the year based on the PCIs that the condition that we've observed in the field. We can have pavement experts come and help us determine what is the right appropriate treatment based on the roadway cross-section that was constructed X amount of years ago and how it's holding up over the roadway traffic that we're seeing on it today.
Hopefully there's not a lot of variability between streets because we inspect them. We check the compaction. We know what they're putting down for base. The asphalt has to meet certain specifications, has to be laid down in a certain way. So that's all. Our inspectors are there every step of the way, and our engineers review all the plans so they meet all city standards and specifications. So I would be shocked if there was anything in our reports that said that, one road designer and builder is better than another. I mean, I'm sure there is small variabilities in that, but hopefully with our standards, they're all the same.
I just wanted to add on to one thing. We do.
And you are Mr. White.
Zach Weigel again.
Zach Weigel again. You're right. Capital Projects Manager.
Thank you.
So we do have our public works standards that specifies what the mix is for our asphalt and for our concrete streets, and we do regularly look at those standards and make sure we're up to speed with industry standard and that we're using the right material. So,
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Cosgrove?
Yes.
We are not going to make it on time.
We are.
Storm-
7:30.
We're 7:30.
Oh, we're 7:30? Okay, all right.
Yes.
Well, we're good then.
And I think we're actually, we have capacity, so
Okay.
if you want to wax nostalgic on this next one, you certainly can.
I was going to suggest a high-tech approach to the road. We could just recycle all those Butterball turkey pop-ups and just, plant them in there, and when the right time came, we'd know it was time for a redo.
I never thought of that.
That's a good idea.
So let's jump into the Arts, Heritage, and Culture Strategy report, if we could.
Would they be like those strips in the road where if it got too hot, they would pop back up and do something to your tires or anything?
I don't know.
The reverse strip, if you go over it the wrong way.
Anti-reverse.
On the turkeys.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, Mark Ottened, Public Government Affairs Director. We have an esteemed panel here this evening of consultants from Clackamas County Arts Alliance and Taylor Consulting, and I'll let each of them do self-introductions on this.
Thank you, Mark. Good evening, Mayor Knapp, Mr. Cosgrove, and councilors. As you probably recall from our presentation last summer, the Clackamas County Arts Alliance received a community enhancement grant from the city of Wilsonville to investigate opportunities that might exist within the city for an investment strategy for arts, culture, and heritage. The Arts Alliance subcontracted with Taylor Consulting, sitting immediately to my right. You'll hear from them in just a moment. And they have prepared the draft report that is in your packet, and we will be pleased to field any questions from you this evening.
And you're Ms. Snow.
And I'm sorry, thank you. I did not introduce myself. I am Cheryl Snow, and I am the Executive Director of the Clackamas County Arts Alliance.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, and Mr. Cosgrove. I'm Siobhan Taylor with Taylor Consulting, and if it is all right with you, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Oh, that's fine. I'm Una Lochran, also with Taylor Consulting.
And so we'll launch right into our...
Is that the right? It says work session. Nope.
Oh,
nope. Unless they're presenting on the town center floor.
Maybe it's art in the town center.
Well, while Mark is getting ready...
It's right there. There you go.
Thank you.
There we go. And loading this up, I do want to speak to the value of the community of Wilsonville. Una and I discovered a community here that was so fully engaged in the arts, culture, and heritage community that you have here. They were fully engaged, they were fully participatory in everything that we were doing. And
slideshow.
Just go up to where, do you want my glasses?
Don't have my glasses, worthless.
I've been there. So let's back it up just a few slides. Well, we're fine there. A community that really came out to participate and embrace everyone in the arts. I think I'm getting feedback here. In arts, culture, and heritage communities who really wanted to be heard and really wanted to participate in this. We went from very grassroots community activation meetings to community surveys. 126 people participated in our surveys. That's a phenomenal number for community input surveys. We did interviews. We sent out over 100 invitations to stakeholders, business owners, private citizens, residents, school officials, students, and 35 people were gracious enough to offer us significant segments of their time to participate in interviews with us, and the insight they provided was phenomenal. And now let's get down to some of those key findings. What we learned was that this is a community that wants to be heard when it comes to arts, culture, and heritage. What we heard is that it's an inclusive community and that arts, culture, and heritage to them needs to be inclusive. That arts, culture, and heritage is multidimensional. And by that we mean that it's multidimensional in its appeal, whether it's a piece of sculpture, public sculpture in a public place, in a park, or in front of the PGE Training Center, whether it's the production of a new play, whether it's archiving of historic documents at the library by the Boones Ferry Historical Society, a presentation of a heritage talk over at McMenamins, or the celebration of a community's ethnic tradition, for example, the Dia de los Muertos celebration at the Wilsonville High School. Arts, culture, and heritage are relevant celebrations, and they're important to the development and appeal of a healthy community. We also learned that this community believes that not only is it relevant to the healthy development of this community, but it requires the development of all. This community has a very specific vision for their Wilsonville area. They see Wilsonville becoming a regional leader in arts, culture, and heritage. They see a Wilsonville where business is booming as a result of community investment in arts, culture, and heritage. They see Wilsonville becoming a destination for people to come to build their business, to relocate their families, to come and visit, to linger longer, to put heads in beds, to quote a very, very popular tourism saying. And they see arts, heritage, and culture in Wilsonville building greater opportunity in the community. But with opportunity and with vision, there are challenges that emerge. We came upon the challenges of volunteer burnout and volunteer age out. You've got community groups and organizations, the same groups that are doing these projects over and over, but people wear down, people deal with illness, people deal with aging. So the challenge is, how do we recruit and how do we maintain those new volunteers? How do we re-engage people? How do we recruit new people? And then, of course, the age-old challenge when it comes to any community-driven volunteer opportunity, the challenge of funding. But we have some recommendations for you. There are some immediate actions that the community can take and that this city council can take. You have some wonderful plans here in terms of the town center development, the master plans for parks and recreation, and they all speak to including arts, culture, and heritage in their development and master planning process. I was thrilled to see this, and your community members know this and embrace it. There could be a staff position, not necessarily creating a new staff position, but I don't mean to sound crass, but repurposing a staff position or adding on to a staff position that currently exists. You have a tourism plan that has been adopted here at the city. What about creating a tourism and cultural affairs coordinator that advances the city's tourism development program, but also helps to staff tourism promotion committee, but that tourism staff position also works with our existing arts, culture, and heritage committees and organizations to assist them with the needs they have. Some of those needs, again, more low-hanging fruit that we could do within utilizing existing frameworks. Let's talk about creating a welcome package. People said, remember the welcome wagon that used to go around and welcome neighbors to new communities? Well, what about building out an arts, culture, and heritage welcome package, where a welcome package would be telling people about the organizations, for example, the Boones Ferry Historical Society, the Wilsonville Stage Theater Company, the different Wilsonville Festival of the Arts, the Shampooey Arts Festival, the different events and activities that happen, the community organizations that put them on, when those events are held, how you contact them, how you become involved. This Tourism and Cultural Affairs Coordinator could help facilitate that welcome package. That package could be distributed through the Chamber of Commerce, through tourism, through the real estate agencies that you have here in town, through businesses in town, through the school district. So using the existing framework to help distribute those items. This is all low-hanging fruit. You've got a new website was suggested, or modifying the current tourism website you have, again, to include calendars of events, these activities that are there to facilitate again these arts, culture, and heritage organizations, to make them more readily accessible, to help them coordinate their events, to be a resource for them, to strengthen them and help them with their needs for volunteers, for their needs for organization, and for their need for support. Let's look at the school district. and how to help make the school district facilities website more accessible. I had an incredible interview with the superintendent of the Westland Wilsonville School District. I think the school district and the city is to be commended for the relationship that exists there. There is an opportunity for ongoing support and collegial cooperation between the two organizations that will offer some great opportunities to support these organizations. The school district has a staff person assigned to organizing and assisting community groups to access the school district calendar, to access not only athletic fields, but performance space within the school districts. Now, some of the school district space may be more performance friendly or ready than other school district space, but in talking to the superintendent, they are ready, willing, and able to make that more accessible. If an organization doesn't have the bandwidth to get online and be able to use the website, their staff person is available by phone and is willing to reach out and be commendable to help them. So moving right along. Pushing the wrong button. Other recommendations, working, as I said, within the town center parks and rec plans. Town center calls out perhaps creating a new performance area, working within that to do it, or featuring existing and future public art in the parks and public art in the town center area. Now, at one of our community meetings, individuals were calling out, what about creating performing arts opportunities within some of our park spaces? And they called out the Memorial Park area, the amphitheater area, building it out a little bit. There's a natural seating area, and perhaps adding more performing arts space there. So, what about the recommendation of looking at creating new special events or building out on existing community events, expanding the farmers market, expanding arts and cultural events within the parks? Again, the history talks at McMenamins kept coming out. Councilor Lehan, your talks on the historic cemeteries kept getting pointed out because they are sellouts and it's standing room only. Talking with parks and looking at incorporating arts and culture on the water. The river is right there. Signage, walkable trails, bringing arts and culture into that. Working with the World of Speed. They are open and attuned to it, and they also engage with the ability to use it as a tourism tool to bring people here to linger longer, to engage and to support arts, culture, and heritage. And then the equine community, which is at the larger area of the Wilsonville community, but again, incorporating that, it brings so many people here, and incorporating that and blending it in with an expanded arts, culture, and heritage opportunities. Sharing school district space, we touched on that already. There's a history there of cooperative use agreements. They have a willingness to discuss it. The High School Performing Arts Center is definitely an opportunity. Yes, there is the need for more space there, but I know that the school district may be also looking at an opportunity for a bond levy, maybe building out their Performing Arts Center, but they're definitely open to discussing the opportunity to do that in mind with shared space and cooperative use agreements with the city. Existing frameworks, Clackamas Community College, PGE training space, using that for meeting space, for performance space. What about smaller available community spaces? Over at Starbucks at Fred Meyer's, we have a wonderful gallery space. What about other smaller stores, coffee shops, empty storefronts, using that as exhibit space? The opportunities exist. What about repurposing and rebuilding? Creating a cultural center within the town center plan. Looking at the Regal Cinema, that could be the heart of the town center, giving people a place to gather, to congregate, to linger longer, to repurpose. It could be a visionary place for people to have performance space, meeting space, gallery space, gathering space, restaurants, and it fits beautifully within the town center plan. It fits within the tourism plan. There's the Albertsons building. What about repurposing that into a performing arts center and meeting space? Building it out, creating a Wilsonville Center for the Humanities. Communities like Newburgh did it with the Chehalem Cultural Center. Sherwood has done it. Beaverton is doing it with the Research Center for the Arts. Tapping into the human potential. There is incredible human potential here in Wilsonville that just needs a little boost. Creating a cultural arts commission to provide resources and support to these area organizations. They would advise the City Council on art, culture, and heritage initiatives and goals and be a visible reference point for the community. And then the elephant in the room, funding. Well, there are opportunities as well for funding. Whether it be a transient lodging tax, you are already very, very familiar with it because it exists here in the community and you are using it currently. So maybe you look at how you take part of that transient lodging fund and maybe dedicate a set amount every year to fund an arts, culture, and heritage grant or program. There would be through a community tourism matching grant, the Metro Community Enhancement Grant, which is what has funded this project. Some communities do a % for art ordinance. That is also something that you could look at. A % for art ordinance has been used in a lot of communities. It's a tool to ensure that a designated percentage of future public building budgets are set aside. The city of West Lynn does that. Establishing a Wilsonville Community Foundation, a cultural tourism fund, the city of Bend does that, and the fund supports cultural opportunities that actually bring visitors to Bend. So it's arts, culture, and heritage working hand in hand with tourism. So partnering again with your tourism plan. The City of Portland does an arts education income tax fund. It's a flat rate. That's also something that you could operate on. And then do creative placemaking grants. And you could partner with the Oregon Community Foundation, or closer to home, the Clackamas County Cultural Coalition could provide assistance in doing something like that. There are many, many ways that you can model, and I just took my slideshow away because that's wrapping it up. But the bottom line is that there are opportunities that exist here for you. There's low-hanging fruit. You can partner with your tourism plan that is in place, that there are opportunities to partner within Parks and Rec and with the Town Center Development Plan. You've got a community that is engaged, that has vision, and that wants to work with you to see their arts, culture, and heritage thrive.
I'd like to make a very brief concluding statement. There are certain preconceptions that the Arts Alliance had in place before we began this project, and they were based, I think, on bias and on incorrect information. So I was quite delighted to discover as we move through this process that there are numerous existing assets within this city for which possibilities exist in terms of leveraging. And I think the biggest takeaway that I'd like to leave you with tonight is the fact that what Taylor Consulting dug up throughout their investigation is the fact that there is very little additional fiscal investment that would need to be incurred if you would have the capacity and the will to leverage what presently exists and consider the possibilities of collaborative partnership as a tool for investing in arts and culture, because it is clear after we completed the study that the residents of this city value arts, culture, and heritage and want to see this dominant as a feature in their community lives.
So, council, questions? Observations? Charlotte, you've been involved in this quite a while.
Yes, well,
I can loan Mark my glasses to bring it back.
No, that's okay. I have it there. I've just been always been kind of mystified as to why Wilsonville is so far behind. So I don't know, when you say you were encouraged, any thoughts with this study on how it is that we're so far behind so many of our neighboring communities, certainly on the arts piece and on the heritage piece.
I think, if I may just briefly speak to that question, again, this is what was puzzling me, Councillor Leon, right from the start, because given the abundance of opportunity and assets that exist in the city, it was startling that there was such at least an invisibility to what we knew existed in the arena of arts, culture, and heritage. And I think what Taylor Consulting managed to uncover is the fact that while you have numerous assets and groups that exist, they rarely collaborate with one another. They rarely understood the value of working together toward a common goal. And that is partly what drives my recommendation that, that leveraging what presently exists and providing the framework that Siobhan and Una are recommending with an overarching staff position that could help facilitate and coordinate, I think would raise the level of possibility of outcome and product in the community. So the frameworks, I think, are important to focus on. And I don't want to take over your...
Absolutely.
Actually,
and I actually would really agree with that as well, Cheryl, is that the lack of a cohesive staff to kind of give these volunteer organizations a point of report and a resource, I think is probably one of the biggest challenges that they're facing. Pardon me.
It's kind of a piggyback question, I think, on that topic. In the packet, I saw there was a recommendation to consider creating a cultural arts commission.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about how a potential framework for that commission with the independent groups that are already in existence, with the staff person, what that might all look like? And how they wouldn't, you know, how they would overlap in a productive way and not a confusing way, I guess.
Sure. Well, here's what the vision was. And this came out of the community meetings that we were holding. But establishing a commission, and the purpose would be to provide resources, support to the community organizations, and advise the city council on art, culture, and heritage initiatives and goals, and sort of be, as Una was saying, sort of a visible reference point for all of these community organizations. The city council would have the ability to appoint people to the council. There'd be an application process. So you'd have people who have a keen interest in applying, and it would be open to Wilsonville area residents, business owners, and here's a key element, students. Whether they be students at Clackamas Community College or students at the high school. I was so impressed with the caliber of students that we met at the high school who are so passionate about their art, whether, you know, through the people we interviewed with MAP, the students working in Christopher Chatola Hart's art program, the students setting stuff up for the Dia de los Muertos. I mean, they are so visionary and passionate. They were volunteering at the Wilsonville Arts Festival, and they want to volunteer. They want to be engaged. So getting students on it, and then having a staff member assigned to the commission who would assist with meetings, communicating, coordinating their packets, their arts, culture, and heritage events. That would be such a shot in the arm to elevate the ability of Wilsonville's art, culture, and heritage communities to become a leader in the region.
Again, let me jump in here. I want your remarks, Siobhan, gave me some fodder to more fully answer your question, Commissioner Leon, which is why is there such a difference between what we see in Wilsonville regarding this arena and other cities? Every city in the county where arts, heritage, and culture thrives are cities which support a city arts commission, or as these folks have described it, an arts and culture commission. It is extremely important to have two things in place: validation from the city level, which creates a context and an affirmation for those folks who are volunteering in these various groups, and for the citizens who have the interest in understanding whether or not there is a place and an opportunity within their community for what they value. So cities like Oregon City, Happy Valley, Estacada have been thriving because they have city-based arts commissions, arts and culture commissions, with staff not always full-time assigned to that arena, but often, as Siobhan recommends, partnering with a tourism sector, or in other cities, a business department. And those city-level committees, again, not only have the credibility and affirmation, but provide the practical and pragmatic experience to help garner all of the energy of the volunteer groups. And I will say, conversely, the cities that do not have that in place, like West Lynn, continue to stumble in their inability to meet visionary plans that are created in the community. There has to be an overarching framework in order to support that vision of those plans.
So we went through the process here within the last couple of years of trying to get a tourism committee off the ground. It is functioning at this point. We're what, 2-3 years into it at this point. We don't yet have a tourism staff specifically designated. So the question might get to the point of, when are we ready for a half-time tourism person that could also be a half-time arts and cultural person? And that would be a budgetary impact of some kind, though it would seem like the transit room tax might be able to qualify to pay for a portion of that, if not a significant amount of it.
Well, we have a certain amount dedicated toward tourism of the TLT that we, and then the rest goes in the general fund to pay for police parks and all the other services that are required for infrastructure to support all those various tourist attractions. But I'm not sure what the priority is in adding a staff person. I'm not sure if the tourism committee has talked about that, but Councilor Lehan and Mark Ottenot are integral to that committee. So have they ever talked about adding staff capacity to support arts and culture?
And tourism.
And tourism, yes, the obvious tourism, yeah.
Well, existing staff have been able to do a sufficient job, apparently so far, that they've not been clamoring for it. In part, though, you bear in mind that we have hired consultants, tourism consultants, who are now doing a lot of the actual implementation work for the tourism program. So I think that, be it consultants or staff, there is energy being spent on advancing that program. I don't know, though, if the tourism committee would consider itself an arts and culture body per se.
Although they are connected.
They're connected, but,
Right.
but the people in the committee are managers, hospitality business managers, who maybe view arts as a benefit, but I don't know if they necessarily maybe appreciate arts. So in fact, this is an issue that for our next meeting in December, we've brought the town center plan to the committee, and we have brought the strategy. We want to now bring some decision-making processes or some questions to the committee to see how far do they want to advance this. We now have a little bit of meat on the bones to kind of bring them these ideas and to get some feedback.
So I think that's a good first step. Another option that we could look at is, if you wanted to form an arts culture council or a commission, we could bring some bylaws to you for you to look at, and then talk about some, whatever the budgetary impacts might be in terms of either adding staff or working with existing staff. I was thinking of Parks and Recs as kind of a natural fit for either existing staff person. I was thinking of Erica, might have some interest in this. She's already taken over some of the Kitakata stuff, so there's a tie-in there as well. So I could put together some recommendations, some strategies, and you could have that discussion.
Obviously, that would be good. I was, in my initial question, thinking that we might be getting to the point in the tourism that a half-time, part-time staff person to lead that and move it forward would be in the foreseeable future, and that might be the opportunity
Could be.
to combine. I don't know what capacity we have within parks.
Yeah, I just
under
want
current structure.
I wouldn't want to insert myself into kind of what their priorities are, because we just did adopt their strategic plan and their priorities, and I didn't see staffing for tourism anywhere on that list.
Yeah, but we're paying outside consultants.
We are, but they're
that,
doing very specific things, very specific studies that are important to the Tourism Promotion Committee. I do see them somewhat interconnected, but also very much independent of one another. So what I hear is maybe a public arts strategy. That's something that we could fund through tourism, or we could fund through the general fund. So what I would think you'd want to do is look at it holistically, where you want to be, not just next year, but in 5 to 10 years. If you're talking about building capacity, and making it a priority, that could be something you could add as a council goal as well. So I don't want to prejudge what the new council might have in terms of priorities. I have some ideas that I could bring forward if you want to have further discussion.
It also strikes me that the other difference between this city and all these other cities is they have a place, and we just don't have a place. And I know that is, and we tried when we put through $2 million at the school district, and that went nowhere. And I don't know why that failed exactly, other than the school district was never excited about having us as a partner, but we never pursued it very vigorously either.
I think that's probably the latter is more the issue. I did have a recent conversation with Dr. Ludwig, and they are talking about maybe looking at a different option for that. And there's some recommendations that facility, the best time for them to let community groups use that would be in the summer. And so that's something that we could talk to the local community theater group about. Plan maybe your programming to be super robust in the summer.
Let me just kind of finish where I was going with it, because I know we're running out of time. But if you think about Newburgh, the Chehalem Center is how it's called, or Lake Oswego and their performing arts. And I don't know, Tualatin has that old church they converted for performances and historical society stuff. Anyway, if you go down through them, they've all got a there somewhere. Even Sherwood does. And it seems like unless you kind of have even a modest location that, but we're so short of space here because the community center doesn't have enough space barely has enough space for the senior center activities, let alone community center activities. And we were planning that with the swim center recreation thing, that would pull a lot of the other recreation things out of the community center, but that didn't happen either. And so it strikes me that without a place, even a modest little place, for this commission or these groups to meet or to feel like they had a home, it's hard for me to imagine them being like the other cities that have those places.
Art Tech might be something that you could look at in the not too distant future.
And we had talked about Art Tech. We had talked about even just the church building of Art Tech, not the school building.
And I think that facility might be available to us in the next 3 to 5 years, if I'm reading the tea leaves right, in terms of what the school district has planned. So that might be an option that we could look at.
I think there are a number of them, and you mentioned some of them, but around town, but we have never put it as a priority to identify
a facility
that then I think the volunteers could build up around, which is what it seems like happens in these other towns. Now, I haven't lived in those other towns, so what do I know?
But there is truth to that. The easiest way to attract money is to have a concrete, pragmatic place to attach those funds to. So if you were to identify a specific building and then create a capital campaign specific to that building, it becomes real. It's no longer conceptual. It is something to identify, to hang your name on a sign. But as we discussed earlier in this draft report, it seems that you also have great opportunity with the town center redevelopment.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of truth to what you said. And
otherwise, we'll just be doing this, having meetings and meetings and sitting around the table, BSing, and there we go.
Just to bolster your point, in my former city, the city owned a house in Coolidge McLean Park. We entered into a long-term grant or agreement with the local arts folks, and they were able to go out and secure money to refurbish the entire facility. So there are some options there that we could pursue long-term if you're interested in doing that.
Well, we're using our time. So thank you so much for the report. Council will need to sort of give direction, I think, and probably goal setting in the spring is one good point to be focused on that. I'm not clear whether the commission could come before someone to direct the commission and be the executive sort of the commission, or whether you're going to have the person before you can create the commission.
Well, I think what you want to do is have a strategy for getting from, just like we did with tourism, we had a very logical strategy that we kind of walked into.
Yeah. So developing that might be the...
And this is a good plan to get us going to have that discussion, so appreciate your time.
So just to let you know, what we're planning to do was to bring out this to the public for review during January, looking for more public feedback, and then to bring back to you a revised draft. And if you have any more comments or suggestions in the meanwhile, please do feel free to let us know so we can try to incorporate that.
Just that it be available by goal setting time for the council.
Yes, it will be. And the last item we have on the agenda is on there.
Thank you, ladies.
To not necessarily for any formal presentation, correct, Zach? Matt, did you have a formal presentation? It's just on there so that if you have any questions, we don't have to pull it off consent, we can answer them now. So professional services.
PSA? Professional
services agreement.
Council, any question with regard to the stormwater component of the consent agenda?
If you do have any, Matt is here to answer those questions.
That's resolution 2713.
I wore a tie today, so I want to sit up here.
Yes, get your camera time, Matt. You've earned it.
That's good.
Hi, I'm Matt Palmer, civil engineer.
So the scope of this is...
Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
It's our favorite kind. The real brief ones.
The scope of this proposal, it will accomplish what, Matt?
Phase one is alternative analysis and preliminary design. Okay. And that will get us through to June, and we will, at that point, we'll negotiate phase two work to get us into final design and construction services.
So this is for Coffee Creek, but it's also projected to receive from Basalt Creek eventually, is that right?
Correct, yeah.
And so it's got to be encompassing both, yeah.
Yeah. And I also forgot my map last presentation. I'm not going to forget it this time either. So this is the ditch line here. This is the historic creek channel. Commerce Circle developed and then pushing it into this artificial channel here. So this ditch line seasonally floods out some of these parking lots over the winter time.
You're probably familiar with one of the parking lots. It's been an issue before.
So the study will look at that flooding issue and propose channel improvements and a regional facility in that
additional
area.
Capacity for future.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody question?
All right.
I guess you're good.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Anything else we need to do for work session?
Nope, we can reconvene.
We'll call us adjourned at, 7:29 and reconvene very soon downstairs.